People to jump in quickly. All right, let's do this. Welcome everyone to Software AG's webinar, Building the Resilient Enterprise of Tomorrow. We're here to talk about how emerging technologies are fueling transformation. My name is Ryan Chacon from IoT for All, and I will be providing a brief intro and moderating the question and answer towards the end of the presentation. Our speaker today is John Weiss. He is the Vice President of Emerging Technologies at Software AG. John has spent the last decade working with some of the world's largest companies, including Fortune 500 organizations, seeking to undergo digital transformations in their manufacturing facilities, supply chain initiatives, and enterprise applications. He has a passion for helping companies reduce cost, increase efficiency, and create new revenue streams by leveraging emerging technologies. Welcome, John. Please take a second to introduce yourself and give a quick overview of Software AG for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Ryan. And first and foremost, thanks everybody for taking the time to be here. I know the work from home burnout is real, and there are lots of webinars to attend. So really appreciate you joining us today. Like Ryan said, my name is John Weiss, and I work for a company called Software AG. I'm essentially responsible for everything and anything related to IoT and analytics that happens at North America for Software AG. By way of introduction, I've been here for a number of years. Before Software AG, I worked at a little company called General Electric, where I was responsible for some global smart manufacturing initiatives. So my background is really related to industry, heavy industry, and industrial automation systems, and really different ways that companies are bringing new technologies to connect their enterprise and do new innovative things. I'm a pretty social guy, so I would definitely encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can see all my links here. If you want to meet with me, there's my calendar link. I'll even happily share a virtual coffee with you. And I will shamelessly plug my podcast as well. If you like manufacturing and industry and technology, then I'd encourage you to check out lightsOutIndustry.com. So I mentioned I work for a company called Software AG, by the way. If you're not familiar with us, Software AG, we're about a 5,000 employee software company, very global in nature. We operate in 70 countries, and we have a pretty diverse portfolio. We do many different things, but of course, IoT and analytics is one of those, and that's kind of my focus area. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So we're here to talk about business resiliency. And I wanted to start by just looking at the word resiliency. If you're like me and you're on LinkedIn a lot, you probably see resiliency being talked about a whole lot today. To me, business resiliency or enterprise resiliency is all about an organization's ability to recover quickly from a challenge, from disruption, from some kind of difficulty. And it can come in many different forms and fashions. Now, to put it in perspective or try to make it tangible, think about critical infrastructure. So what if you worked for, let's say, a logistics company, and you were responsible for making sure goods and things and people are seamlessly transported all around the world? And what happened, or what would happen if some piece of critical infrastructure failed and you couldn't do that? What would the cost be to your business if all of your logistics operations were brought to a halt, right? Would it be hundreds of thousands of dollars a minute, millions of dollars an hour? It'd be really significant, right? So critical infrastructure is one thing that is certainly top of mind, and supply chain, especially today, that's another thing that people are thinking about and talking about a lot. So supply chain disruption. I'll give you another what if. So what if you worked for a big global manufacturing company and somebody came into your office one day and said, oh my gosh, there was this catastrophic event, a natural disaster on the other side of the globe, and it's impacted our business, right? What if they told you that all the way on the other side of the globe, this natural disaster has prevented you from creating parts here in the USA or here wherever you may be based? That has significant impact to you, right? You can't get goods out to people, to customers. And of course, the scenarios go on and on, right? This can impact us in many different ways. Now, the scary part is, of course, these are not what if scenarios. These are, holy crap, realities, right? This stuff has actually happened. The first example that I mentioned, this is from Delta. Back in 2016, I believe it was, Delta had a computer outage in Atlanta that grounded all flights globally. It cost them $30 million per hour of downtime. And depending on the reports that you read, the common denominator that I've learned is that it was boiled down to one piece of IT infrastructure that failed, and it was a single point of failure for the entire business. Pretty scary. The second one I mentioned, also very real. This happened as a result of the tsunami that caused the catastrophe at Fukushima. A lot of people don't know this, but it actually impacted the automotive business in many ways. Ford, GM, and a number of very large automotive manufacturers, they actually couldn't produce new black paint after Fukushima and after the tsunami there, because there was one supplier in Japan, just one supplier in the entire supply chain for these large automotive manufacturers, one supplier on the whole planet that made a critical component to their black paint and also to their dark red paints. That supplier went down, of course, as a result of the tsunami, and these manufacturers actually could not produce any more of those colors until the operation got back up and running. So when we talk about resiliency, we're talking about leveraging technology to overcome some of these challenges. And of course, we wouldn't be here today without the novel coronavirus, which, as we all know, has turned toilet paper into gold, right? Of course, I'm being facetious, but the reality is this is top of mind because of the coronavirus, because we've seen today new types of disruption that we really have never seen before, especially in supply chains. And you may be thinking, all right, John, there's a lot of stuff here that you're talking about. Yeah, it's scary as hell, but we can't control this stuff, right? We can't control a tsunami. We can't control a pandemic to some extent, right? And I agree with you, but there's a lot of stuff that we can control, especially through using technology. And in fact, if you think about all of the things that happen that we actually can control, according to NASA, as many as 80% of failures, accidents, incidents in industry are because of human error. As much as 80%. So what if we could use technologies to actually help combat these errors? And when I say technology, of course, I know technology as a word can mean many things. So I'm talking specifically about what I call emerging technologies. And this is my definition here, by the way, so I don't know if it's perfect, but it's my interpretation. And to me, when I say emerging technologies, I'm talking about the latest and greatest technology in the market, or soon to be in the market. Things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality, virtual reality, all of the fun stuff that we talk about through social media and that we do our POCs and proof of concepts and all this stuff. Right? This is the new stuff that's coming. And I also include IoT, or the industrial IoT, but with my fine print of for real here, because I'll talk a little bit about that. So to start the technology discussion today, I want to share with you some of my observations going through this year. I spend a lot of time speaking this year virtually, not a lot of in-person events, but and I sit on some boards, and I'm pretty heavily involved in the technology community. So I thought it'd be fun to just share what I've seen throughout this, let's say, chaotic year, for lack of a better word. First and foremost, I don't see any signs of technology adoption slowing down. In fact, quite the opposite. I think a lot of initiatives have been accelerated because of this pandemic. So I definitely don't see adoption slowing for these kinds of emerging technologies. From what I've seen across the board, the research and development efforts of technologies related to 5G, AR, VR, edge computing, all of this has stayed pretty consistent throughout this year. So I don't see any major pivotal changes in direction of where companies are investing new technologies or vendors are focusing on R&D efforts. One thing's for sure, the market has changed a lot. Customer needs have changed, right? And they're evolving faster than ever now that the climate is the way it is. So vendors are put in a situation, and suppliers are put in a situation where they have to be more agile than really ever before. Enterprises are focused really heavily right now on connectivity and visibility, and largely because so many people are still working remotely. So now people are uncovering just how important it is to have visibility into remote locations. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through the presentation. And last but not least, security. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about today involves connecting physical assets, connecting things in the world so that we can control them or view them remotely in a digital world, right? As all of those things come online, we have to be, of course, more and more conscious of how we are securing those environments. A good place to pause, actually, Ryan. I know you're involved in a lot of stuff as well. And does this match what you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, for the most part, I think it would. We've seen a lot of similar things. Obviously, there's some industries where um, projects have slowed down just because of a shift in focus because of the pandemic. Obviously, at the core of it, IoT and those emerging technologies, what they do for businesses, not just now but into the future, with increasing or improving the efficiencies within an organization, help protect businesses from pandemic-like situations and being able to operate in a better way to help prevent any loss or issues that come up in a situation is similar to this. One question I did have for you as you're talking through this was, what, aside from just the general idea of what IoT technologies and these emerging technologies do for businesses at the core, why do you think that we haven't seen as big of a slowdown or a real slowdown much at all in this industry versus a lot of other industries that were hit really hard by the pandemic?
It's a great question. And by the way, Ryan, thanks for throwing a question at me. It reminds me to remind all of the folks that are participating today. It's a lot more fun for Ryan and I when we have questions coming in. So please use that Q&A box, and we'll adapt and answer them on the fly. But great question, Ryan. So why is there such an uptake in adoption of these technologies? Well, I think first and foremost, people are now forced to do more from further away. Whether you have, whether you're a field services organization or whether you're trying to troubleshoot any kind of asset, right, in the field, whether it's a vehicle, whether it's a machine in a factory, it could be anything. Um, People are really conscious of how they want to help their customers, and safety and safety for workers and their health, of course, are top of mind. So I think people are adopting this technology, one, to do more from further away, like remote asset monitoring and diagnostics and things like that, or remote asset troubleshooting. That's been a big uptake that I've seen. So I think that's a big part of it for sure. I think the other part of it too is that people, now that they're grounded and they're not traveling as much, they realize that what we used to talk about years ago, the quote unquote single pane of glass into an enterprise, that was a big buzzword, right, years ago, single pane of glass. People today realize just how important that is, because they can't get on a flight and go check on a factory because they have a company policy that says, well, there's no internal travel right now. Right. So now they're realizing, holy cow, if I actually would have done that connectivity project a couple of years ago, I'd be able to see what's going on.
Yeah, I think, the pandemic, as unfortunate of a situation as it is going to bring different things to top of mind for executives and leaders within organizations, and kind of reprioritize initiatives and projects in order to help prevent their organization from suffering through something like this again. If you know what I mean, like it's something that, if done correctly, can help prevent company from suffering the losses, whether it's personnel wise, whether it's revenue wise, efficiency wise, you name it. through a situation like a pandemic or anything that is closely related to that they may have not been prepared for.
Yeah, absolutely. And you use some great words there that leads right into my next slide. So you mentioned what companies are thinking about or what's top of mind. And so that's quite literally my slide here. So what is top of mind for CEOs and for organizations today as they not only try to survive but thrive through this pandemic? And there's a lot to unpack here, and don't worry folks, I don't mean to scare you. We're not going to go through every single one, I promise, but there are a couple that I want to call out. Remote work, I think that's kind of a no-brainer, right? Most of us are probably in a home office right now, praying our kids don't barge in and start screaming at any second. At least that's what I'm doing. But most of us are painfully aware of the remote work. But some of the other ones were a little bit interesting to me, like the use of drones and the use of private networks and things like that. But without dissecting this too much, I do want to map a few of these to what we consider to be emerging technologies. So first and foremost, remote work. This plays pretty nicely off the dialogue we just had, Ryan. Remote field services, condition-based monitoring, worker health and safety, tracking our employees and doing contact tracing, making sure that everybody is staying socially distanced within the work environment, making sure people are wearing their PPE. But what's cool is that companies are embracing technology to do this. Computer vision systems, smart beacon type technology for track and trace purposes and contact tracing. Supply chain's another one. These types of technologies are being used for things like fleet management, vendor and ecosystem visibility, meaning when am I going to actually get my parts from my vendor so I can start building what my customer has paid for, things like that. Some of the stuff that wasn't a challenge before this pandemic, it's a real challenge. And I'm sure most of us remember not all that long ago, it was virtually impossible to find toilet paper or paper towels. And you probably still can't find things like Clorox wipes, disinfectant wipes, for example, right? Some stuff is still so hard to find. That's the consumer world. It's just like that in the commercial world. People are having a really difficult time getting parts and pieces to make things. And customer visibility for ship on time metrics. Visibility from a customer perspective. Many people might not know this, but there's a big push in the industry right now to give more visibility to customers. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but most of us have become very, very used to purchasing things on Amazon, right? And you can check in real time, where's my order? When is it going to be here? I know it's going to be here in 2 days. And we've just gotten very used to that kind of service. The commercial world is lagging behind in the B2B space. So there's definitely a focus for many companies on investing in letting my customers know ahead of time when there's going to be a delay. I've worked for many organizations, or with many organizations, I should say, on these types of supply chain projects where they, in the B2B world, they actually didn't know their shipment was going to be delayed until the day it was supposed to ship. That's a big problem if you're then trying to sell stuff out from your customers. So pretty interesting stuff. The third one, security. We talked about security as a trend that I've been kind of keeping an eye on a little bit, but security is critical right now because we are connecting so many things, and it's not just digital security, it's physical asset security. There are less people in factories or less people in locations, which means there are less people to supervise things as well. Making sure the right people are using the tools and the assets that they're supposed to use is really important. So there's some really cool and interesting computer vision and AI, artificial intelligence type use cases for this kind of security. And then last but not least, the one that I wanted to focus on, digital twin and simulation. This one's, of course, it's been a huge focus for the industrial IoT for quite some time. But it still remains kind of top of mind. And virtual reality, augmented reality, that's that's playing really nicely into the digital twin and simulation world as well. Think about being able to run a simulation of a part, but instead of doing it on a computer screen, you can put your VR goggles on and actually see that part operating just like it would in real time right in front of your face, right? And you can make it larger, smaller, you can expand the parts out to check out all of the different components. Really cool stuff. And it sounds kind of sci-fi, I think, the way I'm describing it, but what's really amazing is that it is truly happening today. It's real.
John, let me jump in real quick. I have a couple questions that came through during this slide that I think are relevant to ask now versus the end.
Yeah,
Um,
please.
so this came in from Thomas. He said that he's a bit surprised to see AI, 5G, and cloud below the line and fading in importance. Should the chart be read in a relative way? That is, that these really important topics are fading as compared to what has become the 500-pound gorilla, remote working?
I think that's a good question. And since it's 5G and the name is Thomas, I'm going to bet that's my good friend Thomas first there. Thomas, thanks so much for joining. By the way, if you don't know Thomas, I will shamelessly plug him as well. Thomas First, 5G expert. The guy is super, super knowledgeable in this space. Good question, Thomas. I think you should read this in a way of shifting interest. So I think there's no doubt that 5G has, and that kind of private network connectivity has been a focus and still is a focus, but I do believe it has taken a bit of a backseat to what most people have deemed to be critical in nature as they try to survive through the pandemic. Hopefully
Great.
that's helpful.
Yeah, that's absolutely great. I think that's how I was thinking about it as well. And then one other question came through relevant to this slide and also the previous slide from Eric Kahn. He says, how do you think the advent of a vaccine will affect the acceleration of digital transformation? It may obviously shift what's top of mind as well, but just generally, how do you see a vaccine affecting the acceleration of digital transformation?
Oh man, what a good question, Eric. So this stuff operates a little bit slower than the stock market. You're probably asking that because you saw what happened to Zoom's share price. For anybody who's not familiar, when Pfizer announced that they had some very, very confident and high results, positive results from their COVID vaccine, Zoom stock's price actually tanked the very same day because people are saying, "Holy cow, we're not going to need that crap anymore. We're going to be back in the office," right? So, so all of a sudden, the teleconference takes a hit, that industry. But good question. I think what will happen, almost to Thomas's point, I think we'll see the shift start to go back to less quote unquote pandemic or COVID focused use cases and
Mhm.
start to go back into some of the things that we were a little bit more focused on before this year. So I think there'll be a bit of a larger emphasis on 5G and private network adoption, and getting some more of the let's say process automation or industrial automation use cases underway versus today. The biggest focus, as you can see here, is remote work and worker health and safety. That's going to take a backseat for sure as somebody begins to release a vaccine. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree. I also believe there's going to be a lot of initiatives already started as the vaccine comes out that they're going to carry through with the progress of those projects in order to help prevent, any large, kind of downfall for the organization into the future. So they're prepared in case anything like this does happen again. But I do think that circle will start to shrink, and you will see some of these other ones that probably had the momentum behind them to be growing start to grow back again in relative terms to remote work and others.
Totally agree. It is important too to keep in mind, though, even through the introduction of a vaccine, I don't. I'm sure most people would agree with us. We live in a different world now, right? It's never going to go back the way it was 100%. So I do think remote work, worker health and safety, I think these things will continue to be top of mind, or at least a top priority for a long time. Um, but I do believe that they will start to shift out of the first position, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Great questions. Thanks, guys. And all the attendees, please feel free to keep them coming. If I can figure out how to advance here. All right. So Emerging technologies are making a big impact. If you've attended my webinars before, you've seen this slide, so sorry, but I really, really like this thing. And the reason why I like this, these are stats from Gartner. It's because it tells a story that is really important to understand. IoT is maturing. Emerging technologies are maturing. It's no longer about who is doing it, right? We used to show stats from Forrester and Gartner and all of these analyst companies about X percentage of companies are considering using this technology and stuff like that. The reality is now we're taking measurements on who's more mature or advanced in their adoption. So it's here and people are doing it. In fact, 61% of enterprises show a high level of IoT maturity, meaning they're not just connecting to a machine and calling it IoT and cleaning their hands, right? And then saying we're done. That goes back to my comment earlier about IoT for real. And I'll pick on that in a little bit. 63% of organizations that adopt this technology expect to achieve a financial payback in only 3 years. That means by year 3, the technology is paid for itself for more than half of the companies adopting this stuff. And last but not least, and I really like this one, 80% of organizations that have implemented this kind of technology have realized greater value than expected. This is a really important one, and I'll give you a real quick example of how this happens. So I was working on a manufacturing use case with a customer, and the whole time we were focused on reducing quality defects. And so we implemented some very, very effective predictive analytic models to do some predictions so that we can predict when a quality defect was going to happen so we could get ahead of it. And long story short, what ended up happening is not only did we prevent quality defects, but we were able to predict them, that we were able to identify and predict them so early in the manufacturing process that we actually increased throughput and efficiency on the line by letting them basically not work on what we knew would be bad and only work on what we believed with very high confidence would be good. So the original focus was quality. The output was not only quality, but it was also an increase in efficiency and throughput. That's the kind of greater value than expected that this is talking about. Pretty neat stuff. So where is all this happening? Well, shouldn't be a surprise to most folks that stay on top of this topic. Manufacturing and industrial use cases are leading the pack. 22% of all applications happen there. And what's interesting to me, when you look at transportation and mobility, energy and utilities, and manufacturing and heavy industry use cases, those are leading the pack pretty consistently, but they're not growing really aggressively. They have kind of moderate growth compared to retail, which is actually really surprising to me. If you would have asked me 2-3 years ago if I thought retail was going to be a big player in the IoT space, I would have told you, no way, you're crazy. But as I've learned over the last 18 months or so, retail actually does have a serious seat at the table here. And even through the pandemic, by the way, consumer connected devices, supply chain initiatives that impact online retail, logistics, and all of the things that go into buying something, even online, they're using this technology to make sure you get what you purchased in a timely manner. Really cool stuff. Another thing that's interesting to me here, smart cities and smart buildings incredibly declining incredibly fast. The adoption and application of these types of technologies throughout this year. This one was particularly interesting to me because I see a lot of articles and a lot of papers about the value of smart cities and smart buildings, but was really intrigued to see that it's actually on a pretty steep decline throughout this year. And before I get off this slide, just to give you, because I love manufacturing, as I mentioned earlier, just to give you an idea of how big this market is, 22 billion with a B, 22 billion industrial connections by 2025. That's huge growth. Today, there's only about less than 18 billion. So it's more than double just by 2025. Pretty incredible. So Why are organizations investing in this technology? What makes this stuff so good? Well, people are looking to increase production quality and efficiency. That's a kind of a no-brainer, right? Everybody wants to produce more and more efficiently so they can make better margins and things like that. People are looking to innovate new products and new services. Having connected assets helps you understand exactly how consumers and customers are using your goods, your products. Understanding how people are using them, well, you can now close the loop with R&D and the product teams and make things that people find more valuable. Folks are looking to decrease operational costs. This comes in many different shapes and sizes. It can be field services. It can be true operational hard costs inside of a manufacturing process. It can be getting away from preventative maintenance schedules and onto predictive maintenance schedules so that you can save money on asset maintenance. That's a very popular use case in fleet management. And last but not least, the one that most of us are probably most familiar with, creating new revenue streams through, fill in the blank as a service, asset as a service, um, anything. GE is known very well for this because years ago they got out of selling airplane engines, and instead of buying an asset, an airplane engine, you'd buy flight time. So you'd pay for flight time as a service, basically. And anytime it was time to upgrade that jet engine, GE would come in with a new one. You didn't have to buy a new one. You just keep paying your monthly fee, if you will. So pretty interesting stuff. Now, it does take some planning and some thought and strategy to make this stuff happen. And so how can you ensure success when you implement these kinds of technologies? Well, one specific area I want to call out is integration. We polled an audience. We did a survey, and we asked people, what are some of the hardest things and struggles that you have with adopting IoT? 70% of people said that they struggle to get enterprise systems to connect back into their IoT solution, and vice versa. So planning for integration, it's critical. And not only is it critical, it's proven to be valuable. And what I mean by that, if you look at the Gartner hype cycle for the IoT, there's a lot of stuff here. And just to quickly explain how this works, on the left-hand side, you have an innovation trigger that then goes all the way up like a roller coaster. That's all the stuff that people get excited about. The latest and greatest features and functions that are kind of buzzy that you hear about on social media. And then what happens is at the very, very top, there's a peak of expectations. And then boom, it drops like a roller coaster all the way down into what's called the Trough of Disillusionment. So what this is saying is basically we get really excited about stuff. We realize it's not going to do anything that we thought it would. And then boom, it dies. If I could simplify this. And what comes out, what survives through that trough of disillusionment is the stuff that we have understood to be valuable. And as you can see here, IoT integration, this is predicted to be mainstream by Gartner within the next 2 to 5 years as a value-added productivity driving add-on or requirement for these kinds of projects. So it's very real. Now, I picked a little bit about or on IoT a little bit earlier, saying you have to do it for real, right? What I meant by this is that there are what I've identified as 5 stages of IoT. A lot of people start the way they should start by getting connected. So they connect to a machine, they can, maybe control an asset remotely, but generally speaking, they're just connecting. Then they start to analyze stuff. They put data on a dashboard and they look at it. And most people stop here and say, okay, we did IoT, hurrah. The problem is you haven't. Right? This is why most organizations roll their eyes when I say, let's talk about IoT, right? No, come on, been there, done that, John. I don't want to talk about IoT. Okay. But then you get into the discussion and you realize this is where their journey ended. The reality is, as you can see at the bottom, you get very little return on your investment at this stage. The third stage, when you start to get into predictive analytics, or really anything, it doesn't even have to be prediction, right? It can just be driving actionable insights from your data. That's where you start to see serious value. From there, the integration piece that we just spoke about, being able to contextualize your IoT data with the rest of the enterprise and being able to integrate with the rest of your enterprise applications so that you can do the final step, which is what everybody's trying to do in this space, automation. You want to be able to automate actions that result from your IoT device and asset data. This sequence here is what gives you not only the ultimate value, but it's what lets you do something like, I predict that I'm going to have a failure and I'm going to automate a field services worker to get a request to get out there to fix a problem before it results in an unplanned downtime event. That's the classic predictive maintenance use case, right? But you have to have all of this to make IoT real, to fulfill its promise.
John, let me jump in real quick if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, please.
So as you went through this slide here and you stopped on analyze and you said, people come to you and say, oh, we already did IoT. This is, we've done it. Let's move on to another topic. Why do you think companies kind of stop there? And how do you, I guess, what advice do you have for organizations to be able to get past that stage into the higher value stages of the IoT journey?
So two-part question. So the first part, why do people stop there? Well, because that's the easiest stuff to do. It's easy to connect to a machine and it's easy to send that data into a dashboard. Whether you've purchased an IoT platform to send it to, whether you're just piping it into Tableau, whether you make something homegrown, right? That's the easy stuff, quite frankly. It's almost commoditized at this point. So I think that's why people stop there, because all of a sudden they get to a point where they need to now drive actionable insights, which require some serious analytic capabilities, and they didn't plan for that. And now it's hard, right? Now they have to go find a budget or more budget to find a vendor that can help with analytics capabilities and things like that. So it becomes a larger project in and of itself that I think people didn't plan for, which ultimately I think is the underlying cause, is that people don't strategically plan to adopt this technology, Ryan. I think they just say, oh, this thing's kind of cool, let's go ahead and test it out. And there's just no real strategic plan to get all the way through these steps. So that's a critical part. And I think the second part of that was, how can I make suggestions? What's my suggestion for helping them overcome that? Is that right?
Yeah, basically, how do you get to those more value, those stages that they realize more value in?
Yeah. So the advice I would give is start small. You have to be able to identify quick wins to gain momentum internally, right? When you share this vision internally and you're looking for executive sponsorship, you have to be able to prove the value of this. And the best way to do that is to start small. You don't have to start by trying to connect, an entire factory or an entire fleet of vehicles. Connect one. Prove out a simple use case on one to gain momentum internally and to gain that buy-in. That's also going to give you time to learn and fail fast without a massive cost associated with it, so that you can plan and ultimately get through this entire process.
Okay. One other question came in actually from our audience, from an audience member named Kui. He asked, you mentioned integration. This is something that I'll add on to as well. What are some of the things people don't consider or struggle to consider when they adopt IoT, particularly relating to the integration kind of stage in this process? Because we've, through a lot of the people I've interviewed on the IoT for All podcast, that's a very interesting stage where value is more realized, but it also drums up a lot of potential problems. And maybe it's not something somebody thinks about until they get there. They don't realize kind of what goes into that stage. So are there other things kind of related to the integration piece, or just maybe surrounding that piece, that people often don't consider or struggle with when they're going down that IoT adoption path?
Yeah, there are two things that often get overlooked really early in the process. And one of them I mentioned just a second ago, but it's having a plan. It That's the least fun part of all of this because it requires documenting an approach and strategizing and putting time and effort into documenting a plan that you can stick to. That stuff's not fun, right? I get that. I've had to do a lot of those. What's fun is getting your hands dirty and actually connecting stuff and seeing the result. But without a plan, and without a roadmap and an approach to the project, you will it's inevitable, right? You're going to hit snags that you didn't think of, integration being one of them. The other thing that can be a challenge that people don't consider is actually the internal mechanics, especially if you work at a large organization, of getting all of the buy-in from all of the people that are required to make this happen. For example, if you're an OT person, you work it within a business unit or a line of business, it's really uncomfortable sometimes to bring IT folks into the discussion early, right? Because you're afraid that they're going to say, no, 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 we don't have the budget for this. We don't know, it's not secure, it's not safe, or whatever. But that's actually a miss, because at the end of the day, you're going to need IT support. That's why there are so many webinars and white papers on what's called the convergence of IT and OT, bringing both parties to the table to make this happen, because it's a team sport, right? You have to do that. And what I find is doing that much, much, much earlier in the process actually makes for a pretty seamless delivery, because by the time you get to the end, IT is bought in and it's really easy to pull the trigger to do it. Um, so those are just a couple things off the cuff, Ryan. I could
Sure.
probably spend a whole hour just on suggestions on
That's
how to be
totally fine.
successful.
That's great. Yeah, yeah. With we have about a little over 15 minutes left, so I'm gonna let you get through the presentation. A few other questions did come in, so we'll hold them to the end.
All right, I appreciate that. I'm gonna try to cruise through some of these so we can get to some more questions. A couple things I want to explain, and I'll just build this out really fast. So most of us at this point are probably familiar with what an high level architecture looks like, right? We have things in the field, they connect to oftentimes an edge gateway. That gateway will often then send data up to a cloud or send a central IoT, core platform somewhere. What I want to call out here is a shift from cloud to edge that's taking place. It's becoming incredibly important for organizations to make real-time decisions. And what people are finding out is that they can be most effective at making real-time decisions at the edge. And when I say edge, I'm talking about doing compute right where the data is collected or captured. So there's a number of reasons why this is happening. Again, this could be a webinar in and of itself. And in fact, I've done a number of webinars on edge alone if you're interested in this. But one, let's say two primary reasons. One, latency. People cannot afford to have mission critical type decisions being made with lag time to the cloud and back to the asset. So that's one. And two is cost. People are realizing it's very expensive to do all this stuff up in the cloud. It's pretty cheap to get started, but my gosh, at scale, this stuff gets expensive, right? People are starting to realize that. So they're saying, how can I take a lot of this compute power and bring it on premise or at the edge? That alone makes me actually really excited for 5G, but that's a story for another time. And so why is this so important? Well, it's really important to understand that you have a finite time to react to a business event, to an outage, to a downtime event. And the longer you take to act on this, well, the lower the value of your response. This is what Forrester research calls a perishable insight. It's kind of like produce, right? The longer you take to eat it, the longer you take to use it, well, it's going to spoil. The same goes for business decisions. So having virtually no latency and real-time decision-making to critical events, it's paramount for these companies. That's why they're looking at doing more at the edge. Some pain points, and we already kind of talked about these a little bit. People are pressured, and I know this, that if you want to do this, you're going to be pressured internally by your executives, by your leadership, to show an ROI quickly. And we did already talk about integration with other systems. So just some things to keep in mind when you're looking for a solution. Find something that specializes in rapid development. something that's going to get you to market quickly. Powerful self-service type environments and stuff that does a lot of things out of the box. There, you can be choosy and have a pretty let's say robust laundry list of asks, right? This is a packed market. Gartner recognizes 400 IoT platforms in this market, so it's packed. And it's because of that, it's really important that you think carefully about what you need and take the time to assess people. Integration with existing enterprise systems, we talked about this, but the most important one is probably the first one. Find something that will tie into your existing infrastructure so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's a really important one. API driven and open. It's critical. And so, uh, of course, this leads me to speak a little bit about what we do at Software AG in the IoT space. Our platform is called Cumulosity IoT. It's open and independent. You can do anything and everything over APIs. You can run it anywhere. If you have an agreement with Azure this year and AWS 5 years from now, you can lift and shift to another provider, right? Very, very easy to do. Rapid and self-service. You can prove value in minutes and days and weeks, not months and years. You can get to market very quickly. And like I mentioned, you can run it quite literally anywhere, in the cloud, at the edge, on premise. It's the same code base that runs everywhere. So would strongly encourage you to check it out, softwareag.com/IoT. So just before we get to questions and we wrap here, I wanted to share my perspective on what do I think the future holds for this technology and where do I think 2021 is going. Well, first and foremost, I think we're going to have a lot of new connectivity options. Low Earth orbit's really cool. If you're not familiar with the near Earth orbit and the low Earth orbit initiatives, it's all about bringing connectivity through satellite. Very, very neat stuff. That picture, by the way, that's the view of all of the satellites orbiting the Earth. Pretty neat stuff. Remote assets, I think not only are we going to be doing condition-based monitoring, which is already happening a lot remotely, but I think we're going to see more and more people actually controlling assets remotely. So think about mining equipment. Somebody, instead of being in a mine, digging underground, perhaps they're in a control center somewhere. Perhaps they're at home, right? Actually digging massive holes in the earth remotely. It's pretty wild stuff, but I think that that's actually coming a lot sooner than you may think. We talked about the 2-day shipping and people wanting to get items faster and more visibility into when they are going to have things from their supply chain. Simply put, people are tired of waiting for things. I'm guilty of that, right? If I don't have it in 2 days, I'm like, where the hell's my stuff? So that's I think there's going to be tremendous focus on supply chain and opening up opening up new ways to let consumers and customers see where their goods and products are, and using new technologies to get it there even faster. And last but not least, like we just spoke about, the shift from the cloud to the edge. There's going to be tremendous focus on the edge in the coming years. Gartner's got some really interesting reports on this, but it's coming for sure. And back to my satellites, I'm just sharing this because I thought it was super cool. Did you guys know there's over 2,600 satellites orbiting the Earth right now? I had no idea there were that many. Pretty cool stuff. All right, so with that, again, my name's John Weiss. Strongly encourage you to reach out, connect with me, and I'll leave this this splash screen up here while we field a few more questions, Ryan.
Great. Thanks so much for that, John. That was fantastic. So yeah, let's get into the questions. We only have a few minutes left. First one is from Nicholas. He asks, do you think that the business model can also be limiting to the adoption rate? And also, what business models do you see as the best approach to help scale?
Oh man, what a question. So yes, the business model can definitely be limiting to the adoption rate. I think all of this that we're talking about, it's all business driven. In fact, in my 5 steps, there should really be 6 steps, and the very first one should be, prove the business value or find business justification to do this. In fact, actually, just recently on LinkedIn, I polled my community and I asked them, what's the most important thing for adopting technologies, emerging technologies? And Nicholas, you better believe what everybody selected, not everybody, but what the majority selected, and the number one response was business justification. So, it's hard to give you an answer around what business models um, are best to approach scale. I think it just goes back to my original comment around being reasonable about where you start small, gain some momentum, gain some wins, and let the market tell you, let your users tell you what's working, what's not, and expand from there. So hopefully that's helpful.
I think the flexibility is an important thing to mention. I mean, finding an organization or a group of partners that are going to help you build an IoT solution that understand that is critical, in my opinion, because that business model truly has to match your business, and it can't be something that's cut and dry from day one. It's something that has to remain flexible, so you can see as you
Yeah.
roll out, as you scale, you move through the pilot stage and so forth, what actually is the best for your business as you start to realize what the actual costs are and how your customers or your own business is utilizing the end solution. So I think that flexibility is key, in finding partners and a company to help build that, understand that is very important to adoption and success overall.
Yeah, totally agree.
Next question is another one from Eric. He asks, how long do you typically see an organization take to adopt and scale an IoT solution?
Well, I think it actually goes back to Nicholas's question, right? Like, what's the business justification? What's the outcome that we're trying to do, or that we're aiming for? Um, I've worked on some pretty large implementations for IoT to the tune of over 1 million connected assets, and I've seen some of those projects, even quite literally into the millions of connected devices, take less than 18 months to hit market at production scale. So I think it's a loaded question, Eric. It depends on what you've selected as as a partner, as a vendor, and as a technology. If you're using something like a platform out of the box, like Software AG's solution, Cumulosity, you're going to get to market a lot quicker than, say, building it in-house on something like Azure, right? It's just proven by analysts. There are pros and cons to both, right? Don't get me wrong, but a lot of it depends on what you've selected and what your end goal is, if that makes sense. Um, Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I think also one thing to mention is the more knowledgeable an organization is when they start their IoT journey, the better it sets themselves up for to bring something to reality more quickly. Like having the buy-in from stakeholders around the organization, having the budget, having the understanding of what you know and also what you don't know, and being okay with that, and then working with the companies that are the experts to teach them your business, teach them your use case, understand your end users so the solution can be built correctly. And I think the better you are prepared for that journey, the more likely you are to get to scale more quickly.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it also kind of comes back full circle to having a plan, right?
Yes.
If you have to have a strategy and a documented approach that you can use internally to get buy-in from all of the key stakeholders, but having a strategy and an approach, it doesn't only help you think about things that you may have missed otherwise if you were to just kind of fire from the hip and just run with it, but it also will help you hold yourself and your teams, and your partners and everybody involved accountable to a defined timeline, just like any good project. So that certainly can help.
Yeah, we did a webinar in the past with a partner who talked a lot about the reports that were coming out from a lot of these analyst groups about how most, or like I think like 76% of projects don't get past the pilot stage, and that really knocks down the time to adoption and scale for an IoT solution. So understanding how to overcome those roadblocks. And a big part of that is the planning phase and being prepared for what an IoT journey actually is, contributes and goes a long way in getting to successfully scaling a solution.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Another question we had from an audience member, Kui. He says, "Why do you think IoT innovation in the agriculture space is stagnant? It seems like food supply food supply chain has taken a huge hit during the pandemic.
I'm laughing to myself because you know what's really funny, when I downloaded that report from IoT Analytics, and I read it, and in typical fashion, I showed it to a couple of my friends. We talked about it, but I asked the same question to my group of peers: why is agriculture on the decline? Because I actually was expecting a little bit of an uptake in connected farming, connected livestock use cases. There's actually a lot of these that I've tested with a number of different organizations, and even simple stuff like monitoring soil moisture to guarantee higher yields on on harvests. So I think the short answer, it's probably largely due to the restaurant and food business, if you will. I don't know what the right word is for that, but there's not enough people going to restaurants right now, and going to events, and going to hotels, and all of the places that the food industry, I think, typically caters very, very heavily to. I think that's probably a big part of it. I think demand for that kind of consumption of food is down. So my guess is that that's impacting it. But I've got to be honest with you, it's a really good question, and I don't have an answer. I was actually quite curious myself.
Okay, cool. Last question. We have 2 minutes here. Is how mature do you truly believe the market has become where it stands now?
I think we've got a long way to go. That's for sure. I can tell you, I've seen some really, really cool things over the last 18 months, 2 years, and even 6 months in a short time period. And the more I see, the more I believe that we can actually do a lot of the stuff that we thought of as kind of pie in the sky ideas years ago. There's lots of really neat, exciting things coming, especially a lot of the use cases around 5G. So I think we've got a long way to go, but I can tell you just the stuff that I've personally implemented in production environments for very large organizations and small organizations over the last couple of years. This stuff's becoming very real and very valuable for a lot of companies. So we've got a little bit of ways to go, Ryan, but I think in many ways we have arrived.
I totally agree. Well, John, this has been fantastic. Appreciate everything you guys are doing over there at Software AG. The insights today have been great. I think this webinar was a good success for our audience. Seemed very engaged. So thanks again for sharing your insights, and we'll make sure all this information is included in the webinar that will be sent out to all the attendees. Anyone who signed up will get a copy of this webinar to be able to watch and kind of dive through into more detail into those great slides you presented. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody.